It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I could not be in Vietnam in person, but it is a bit far from Virginia, USA, where I am. So I appreciate that this is all virtual and that we can be together no matter where we are. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that is building online presence, domain names as critical digital assets. And nowhere do we see that more than in the domain space and the trademark world, the brand world. And we're going to focus today on how domain names and trademarks intersect, how protections and strategies for using names come together as brands, and how we can promote the responsible and smart use of domain names in commercial spaces. And Melody, I'll ask you to forward the slide, please. Today, I'm the moderator. I'm Lori Schulman. I'm the Senior Director from the International Trademark Association. Our panelists are Vivek Gul from L.R and Yongzhen Li from Wanhuida IP. And if you are not familiar with either, L.R is a registrar and registry, and they provide services throughout Asia and I believe the globe. And Wanhuida is a intellectual property law firm with an excellent reputation in the Asia Pacific. And again, they operate, I believe, globally. So we have Yongzhen concentrates on trademark law and advising clients on trademarks. And Vivek is a domain name space expert. And with that, I'm going to ask us to move on to the next slide. We are going to approach this subject in three different sections because each section is important in domain acquisition and use and trademark acquisition and use. And you will see where these two disciplines come together. And to start off, I am going to give you a brief history of domain names and trademarks and how over the years they've developed where now domains can serve as trademarks. And that wasn't always the case. When domains were first commercialized, which was in the mid 1990s, when people, about 30 years ago, when people really started to understand that there could be uses for domain names other than pointers or phone books, that in fact you could build a website, sell goods, sell services, have community exchanges, and a whole variety of information shared throughout the world. What started to happen was when these domain names came out, not only did they serve the purpose that they were invented for in the domain name system, which is matching a name to a numerical address, so you can get to a website easily by memory, like LoriSchulman.com, rather than 1234567. That's how it all began. But then when LoriSchulman.com launched and she had these wonderful, what kind of services? I love to dance. So I was teaching dance online and my services grew globally. And I put a lot of money into my website. I put a lot of money into my advertising. And LoriSchulman.com became world famous for dancing. Then all of a sudden, other people saw how famous LoriSchulman.com was. And then all of a sudden, we had LoriSchulman.org, LoriSchulman.net, LoriSchulman.us. And what was Lori Schulman to do? How can I enforce my trademark against domain names? And in the early 1990s, it was very difficult, in fact. Domain names were not considered as brands. Domain names were very difficult to register in trademark offices around the globe. Some trademark offices did not recognize them as anything but functional. And it was up to trademark attorneys to examine the law, argue for changes in the law, so that it became well understood that because domain names can have brands in the strings, or the strings themselves can become recognized as brands, there should be legal remedies involved. And that's where we developed the Uniform Dispute Resolution process to handle cyber squatting. The US adopted an anti-cyber squatting law where you could go to federal court and actually argue for remedies if someone was cyber squatting on your name. Other jurisdictions around the world developed laws, not quite like the US law, but there were ways inside court systems to make sure that people who were misusing your domain name or copying your domain name or had a very similar domain name and was intentionally trying to mislead people, that there would be a remedy. And the remedy is usually suspending the domain name and transferring the domain name to what should have been the rightful owner, Lori Schulman, who owns lorischulman.com. And this development in the law happened over the course of about 20, 25 years. And 2 years ago, the US Supreme Court decided that Booking.com could serve as a trademark, even though Booking had a generic term in it as because it was booking services, and .com was a top level generic domain. But when you put the two of them together, and when you put marketing dollars around it, and when you survey customers who say, yes, I recognize Booking.com as a single source for a travel service, then all of a sudden it can have some trademark rights. So we went from trademarks being and domain names being completely separate within 30 years, where domain names can serve as trademarks. So that's where we are. And with that, I am going to get our discussion started. And we're going to do this methodically, the way you might advise a client, whether you're a registrar who's providing some advisory services, a registry, or in fact, if you're a trademark lawyer trying to help clients build a brand strategy and protect the brand online. And those three phases are acquisition and delegation, getting the mark or getting the domain name. And sometimes that's together. One of the questions people ask, is it better to get the domain name first, or is it better to get a trademark registration first? And there's differing opinions about that. Then once I have that name, how do I use it? How do I market it? And while I'm using and marketing it, hopefully I'm very, very successful. But when you're very, very successful, people copy, people infringe, people try to commit fraud or scams. Now what do you do? And that's called enforcement. So that is how we're going to frame the discussion today. And I think it will provide some clarity for those in the audience who may not have as deep a familiarity as how you build a digital asset, how you create value, and how domains are critical digital assets. So with that, the way we're going to run this, we have formulated some questions that pertain to acquisition, uses in marketing, and enforcement. And our two panelists will answer the questions from their different perspectives, one from the domain industry and one as a trademark legal advisor. I'm also going to note that we were scheduled to have a third speaker, Christy Lau from Alibaba. And Christy, unfortunately, was not able to come into the Zoom room for personal reasons. And I am going to assume that role of a corporate in-house counsel. Although right now my main job for INTA is digital governance. In fact, I spent over 20 years as an in-house trademark attorney. I also have experience as a trademark examiner, and I was one of the first examiners in the late 1990s to examine domain names as trademark applications. So I do have the experience of being around in the extremely early days of when trademark law was developing. So I will be a little more than a moderator today. When it's appropriate, I will also give the view of an in-house trademark practitioner. And with that, I'm going to get going, and I'm going to do the first question, which is to our trademark counsel. Is it still necessary for businesses to use traditional domain names in the age of social media and mobile apps?
Thank you, Laurie, very much. For me, the answer is definitely positive because I think traditional domain names still remain essential for businesses, although their role may has already evolved comparing with previous times. We have to admit that there are some niche users. I personally categorize them into two major groups. One is the very young, the other is the very senior. For instance, for some Gen Z users, they rarely use Safari or other browsers to view web-based content. They are very heavy users of TikTok, Instagram, those social platforms, and other mobile apps. Um, and the other extreme is like the generation of my parents. They they love apps. They hate websites. So they because what for those Chinese seniors, they even don't type those Roman or Chinese pinyin in their browsers. What they like is to scroll and touch the screen. But those traditional domain names still present credibility and brand control for me. For instance, our firm, wanghuida.com, this domain name looks more professional and reliable than, let's say, linkedin.com/wanghuida. And similarly, my email address, leiyongjian@wanghuida.com, looks more like a professional's email address than leiyongjian@gmail.com. And more importantly, you own your domain name. And social platforms can, for various reasons, either suspend or even cancel your accounts for various reasons. But domain name is yours, and it's a permanent asset in your control. So in this hybrid time, domain names are still quite necessary for most people. And of course, many startups they only open their stores on platforms, which means this business model is more possible nowadays than before. But without a domain, they may lose the chances to grow bigger, and they are also at risk of giving their fate to the platforms.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer, and I fully agree. Having a domain name is the best way to control your own brand. The social platforms definitely have some advantages, and ideally, what you would do is have your own domain name and then also create marketing plans around platforms. I mean, that's generally the best advice that's typically given to new companies as well as mature companies. So I'm going to turn to Vivek. And I'm going to ask you, Vivek, how can organizations realize the full potential and value of their domain portfolios?
Hmm. Thank you, Laurie. Great to be here. Uh, I think that's a question most uh, members of the IP team in a company grapple with because they need to justify an ROI on the large domain portfolio that they're holding. I think the question can be answered in two ways. One, there is definitely a defensive approach to owning domain names. And in many, many companies, I think in most companies, they would actually use two or three domain names or maybe more if they are multinational, but large section of their portfolio in defensive. And that is a significant benefit to the company to have a defensive portfolio where every day you are not being challenged by unauthorized and domain names being acquired using your brand name and holding you at ransom for those domain names. So, from a defensive purposes, having a large portfolio definitely manages and helps you maintain your business and reduce risk. Other thing that portfolio can definitely help you is give you an edge where you are holding domain names or your brand names with direct registrations on .com or popular TLDs to gain credibility in markets. If you enter a new market or if you are going to a different region and you own a relevant CCTLD with your brand name, it gives you credibility when you enter that market because people associate owning a exact match domain name with credibility, and you already have a good stepping stone when you enter a new market. Branding and marketing teams should definitely utilize a domain portfolio and be actively present and working with the IP and IT team to utilize the domain portfolio for their marketing and branding edge.
Thank you, Vivek. I would like to ask a follow-up question. Can you explain defensive registrations and how they work?
Thank you, Laurie. So defensive registrations. Suppose your business name is Vivek Goyal and you own vivekgoyal.com. You're very happy. What if somebody registers vivekgoyal.com but replaces a O with a zero? You know, for people that we were discussing that currently use a lot of mobile phones, the link would appear the same. In a different font, it looks the same, right? If I'm working in India, I should have vivekgoyal.in. So these defensive registrations are domain name permutation combination that you register to prevent other people from registering them and either abusing them or holding them ransom, waiting to sell them back to you at a higher price. Now, having said that, it's almost impractical and infeasible to register all permutation combinations of your brand name across all the 1500 TLDs that we have now, and many more to come in the near future as the next round is opening up. But there is a little science and art to registering the right set of permutation combinations so that you are adequately protected while continuously monitoring to protect yourself.
Thank you, Vivek. I think that leads us into a question for our trademark specialist, Yongshen. How do your clients decide which domains to purchase, and how do you purchase them?
I think there are several layers before they move forward to a purchase. First, they have to decide what kind of trademarks or what kind of business they are doing. Are they doing business globally or locally? Are they trying to acquire a GLTDs or like .cn, .in, or it's for broader reach, so they may need a .com domain name to start their business. And they also have to think about the industries they are in, what kinds of goods and services they're providing. Of course, for domains, it for the memorability, it should be short and simple. And a lot of times people tend to avoid like hyphens and numbers to make it less easy to remember. But then we have to also consider about the availability. A lot of times we have to look it up at Whois website to see whether the domain has already been taken or not. If it is taken, then we'll evaluate first whether there is a cyber squatting issue. So then this may be connected with the enforcement section later we are going to discuss. So for that, we may take some legal actions to get the domain name back instead of directly going to purchase it. But if the domain name is not taken, it's more prudent to avoid trademark issues as well. So it would be a great idea to check with various IP offices websites, WIPO, UIPO, USPTO in China, CNIPA, to see whether there are also some possible conflicting trademarks there already functioning as a trademark. And then if everything is fine, it's great, then we'll move to the purchase stage. And normally our client would conduct an investigation online and sometimes offline if necessary to see if the domain name has already been used. And if yes, how it is used and to what extent, because this step will help us to understand the value and the price of domain name we want to offer to start the negotiation. And of course, the budget is always determined by how urgent the purchase should be completed. And then when we materially start the purchase, normally we use a third party or shell company, we call it, shadow company, whatever, to try to cover the real identity of the client. This way, we can a lot of times just cut down the price and we have a better offer from the other party because most of our clients are very well-known brands or domain name owners. They don't want to get themselves to be in the public and making the deal more complicated.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer. Vivek, do you have something to add, please?
Yes, please. Just a few more points. I think when companies decide which domains they should acquire, they should absolutely make sure that they use their current trademark portfolio into account because your domain names should match your trademark portfolio as much as it's possible. Secondly, do not ignore CCTLDs, especially if you're working in different regions and different markets. Third, while .com and .nets used to rule the world, the new GTLDs are definitely playing a big role in a lot of markets and geographic TLDs. For example, there is NYC, there is .London, there is .Tokyo, right? Uh, for hyphens, I would say that in some markets, I know customers expect a hyphen if your name is longer than something. So If you are working in that market, definitely get a dot hyphen, right? And the last but not the least, IDNs. While today the access to IDNs or the registration of IDNs may not be huge, if you're working in regions like for I know in Thailand, they primarily work in Thai language, right? So if you are based in a country where they work in a local language, you definitely should get an IDN which stands for internationalized domain name, which are domain names not in Latin script, and make sure that you do capture them now, as compared to waiting for and being held at ransom. So just a few points. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. I want to add something too about the local scripts. And it goes back to something that Young Shi, I think it was Young, who described that you may substitute an O for a zero. And what we're finding in the Latin script versus the non-Latin script or the IGN script, some people are substituting IDN scripts and characters for certain Latin characters, again, to achieve misinformation or fraud or redirection. So it is very important when you are deciding what domains to buy to think about that too. Are there scripts where Latin characters could be exchanged and there could be confusion? And if that is the case, you may want to think about defensive registrations in that area. And I'm going to go on to another subject that I'm going to direct to Vivek specifically, because this is something relatively new. In 2012, there was new rounds of applications open for top-level domains like .com, .net, .org. And what emerged is a new kind of top-level domain called a .brand. And I would say that the European community really grabbed onto .brands. The rest of the world is a little bit slower to follow, but they are following. And we have things now like .audi, .hbsc. We have bigger, more well-known names like .google, .amazon. And so this world created new marketing opportunities for brands. Some of the names are used to indicate, for example, geographic subsidiaries. So .audi may say something like Berlin.audi or Frankfurt.audi to distinguish the different regions where Audis are sold. Some organizations, and one that's very famous is Shell Oil Company, .shell. .shell uses the .shell to promote social causes, to promote its charitable works, to promote its plan for environmentally sustainable energy. And so every company can have a different kind of use for a brand. And what makes brands very interesting is that they're closed domains. They're very closely monitored. They're generally not available to the public. Otherwise, there are other ways to perhaps market a GTLD. But a brand is basically a closed world. There's special rules under ICANN for claiming if you're a brand. And with that, I'm going to go to Vivek and say, I'm assuming that some of your clients are using brands. And if they are, how are they using them beyond what I've described? If they're finding them successful, and whether or not those who are not using brands are considering new brands and why. And lastly, whether you're a veteran user of a brand or a new user of a brand or a new applicant, if people are thinking of applying for brands, how, are there special things to consider when they apply? So
Sure.
it's 3 questions, but it's the same topic.
Okay, got it, Laurie. Thank you. And I'm very glad you gave this overview of what a brand is. So I'm going to share with you a use case. So as Laurie mentioned, the uptake of brand was much higher in say US, Europe, UK, where there was much more knowledge about brands and domains and such, but much less on the east side of the world. So in India, when this program opened up, there were about 15 to 20 applications. One of them was by a government bank called State Bank of India. And State Bank of India serves about few hundred million customers, right? Everybody from a tier 1 city to tier 3, tier 4 towns use State Bank of India because it's government backed. They rely on it. And the biggest challenge they faced was phishing attacks, scams, imposters using a similar domain name to create login pages and take away people's savings and login IDs and passwords. So SBI, as its short form, applied for .SBI. And, you know, given the speed at which governments work and government institutions work, I know all of you are familiar with that. They did apply, they had to fight for it, they got it, and they implemented it. So today, if you log in, SBI actually uses .SBI as the brand. And talking to the people who have implemented it and what they were thinking about it, they said implementing .SBI has increased their cybersecurity score. So they are now more secure because they use a .SBI. And that in turn has reduced their insurance premiums to what they used to pay as insurance against cybersecurity risks and fraud. They are facing less complaints from customers who have given the username password on a wrong website. Customers are much happier because they can really see which is the correct domain whenever they click on a link or something and recognize what is true or not. And they have done a fabulous job with it. And it is a use case which speaks on the benefits of dot brands across the world, and especially for institutions which are either related to money or holding sensitive people's information. So that I think is a big use case that I think is a torchbearer for others who are either thinking of dot brands or asking why. I think second question you asked, Laurie, is are brands considering apply for dot brand? And my answer is absolutely yes. Um, Same as 2012, the knowledge about about domain names has not increased tremendously as much as we people in the domain industry think. I personally love brands, domains. I think they are the bee's knees. Everybody should work on it, but not everybody aligns to my thinking. Uh, so when we do meet clients that we work with in the brand protection space, we tell them about this, and they cannot first believe that an opportunity like this exists. They're like, we have never heard of it. We're like, well, that's why we are here. And when we explain to them use cases, Laurie, like the ones you mentioned, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, SBI, there's a company in Europe called Weber, not the barbecue making company, the another company called Weber, which they use to differentiate themselves from the American Weber very nicely. They are really excited by this opportunity because the intellectual property team thinks that this will help save them their IP across the world. Trademarks are territorial, but domain names are global, right? The IT team, there are use cases from AWS, from Amazon, from Microsoft who are using dot brands for their internal purposes to improve the security of their tech stack, right? There are branding people who are absolutely excited because now they can use domain names to shorten the path from a customer seeing an advertisement to actually reaching there to improve their click-through rates. And they are excited with the opportunity to play around and see what they can build instead of relying on domains that are available to do these branding opportunities. The compliance people, the risk compliance people are happy because now the risk of somebody registering a similar domain with a .com or a .net and others and holding ransom is reduced because they can say we have launched this our dot brand and this is the true brand, right? In many countries there are laws which hold the brand responsible if somebody loses money or is faces a risk because of a similar looking brand or a domain name, right? So from all those perspectives we are seeing a lot of enthusiasm for companies, and the only thing I ask them is, today, you're asking us why. Imagine at the end of this round, when you did not apply and all your competitors did, the company will ask you the question of why not. So, from that perspective, I think this is a great opportunity, and we are seeing a lot of enthusiasm from companies and brands to apply for it.
Yes, as a point of information, I think I recall that in the last round, there were over 1,500 new applications. At the end, I believe about 1,100 were delegated. I don't recall, maybe you do, Vivek, what number of that was dot brands, but there was a significant number.
Yeah, I think around 500 to 600 were dot brands.
So that's telling you something, that half delegate. Now, I will say there were some companies who took that dot brand and basically used it as a defensive registration and did not do any marketing around it. There were other companies who have had aggressive marketing plans. And there's some companies who didn't plan to use it, but then found creative uses. Like I said, in the area of social causes, using a dot brand can add a lot of value to social messaging. At least that's what we've found here in the US. So there is a lot to consider. Can you explain about the timing of the new rounds? I know this is something very important for ICANN and for the ICANN community.
Sure. So the next round, the window for application opens in April 2026, and it will be open for 3 months. So it will close by end of June 2026. And this is the second round, which a lot of us who are in the ICANN space have been waiting for last 12 years or 14 years actually. And clients ask us, okay, so if I skip this round, when can I apply next? Like maybe my child will come and pitch you on that to apply for the next round. I definitely don't think I'll be around next round. I mean, things happen and I can. There might be a next round after 2 years or even one more year, but nobody can guarantee that. So the opportunity is now to grab it and use it. No guarantees for the future rounds.
Yes. So if you are considering this as an option, it can be pricey. There is an application fee that goes into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's also legal advice to be obtained. There's technical advice to be obtained. So this is a sport of kings, so to speak, that you probably need a minimum of $500,000 US to even think about getting into this space. So this is something for very, very well capitalized businesses. And there are programs that ICANN has to help communities and small businesses who may be thinking of also applying but do not have that kind of funding. So if this is something that's an option for you as an advisor or as somebody representing a brand, it would be important to go onto the ICANN website and look at the costs, look at the timeline, and see if this is a feasible option. Of course, every day you can go to any site and buy a country code level domain or a top level domain like .com, like .net, .org, .info, and use these domains are known as legacy domains. And the legacy domains, from a marketing perspective, are very well recognized. .com is probably the most recognized in the world. And in terms of use, I believe statistically it's .com, .dk, the German one. I'm spacing on the German. I don't know why. I just can't remember the two letters. Oh, DE, Deutschland, of course. And so there's many different ways you could go in the space. As Vivek and Yang Yi had also explained earlier, Yang Zhen. With that being said, there's a section of this presentation, uses in marketing, that would have been covered by Alibaba in terms of how corporations operate, how corporations think, how corporations use advisors like Vivek and Yang Zhen. And so what I'm going to do is kind of give an overarching presentation, just a few minutes, about what happens inside company when they decide on launching a new brand. While I go through this, I will turn to our experts in the trademark and domain space and ask them how they interact with companies who are doing this kind of work and how they help the in-house counsel advise the clients on when and how to make decisions about acquisition, whether it's at the second level, which is to the left of the dot, or at the generic level, which is to the right of the dot. Which when you look at Vivek's company's name, L.R, it says it all, left dot, right dot. And it covers the universe of which way you can go on this. And there's also something called subdomains. And I do mention that here, where you can use your main brand and then put sub-brands underneath it, so that you'd actually have three terms in in the um, in the names. For example, let's just say Good Bank. The brand is goodbank.com. And then you could have loans.goodbank.com. or checkingaccounts.goodbank.com. So that is one way you can use a domain. Every single product could have a domain, an individual domain. You could have Good Bank, you could have checkinggoodbank.com, savingsgoodbank.com, but that becomes a little cumbersome. And it also affects the size of your portfolio. You know, how big of a portfolio do you want to carry? There's costs to all of this. As I explained, dot brands, running a dot brands can go into well into the seven figures. I mean, the six figures is just to apply and delegate the name, but then you need a full marketing plan and implementation and an annual budget toward that. You usually need headcount. So that's a much bigger deal than using something to the left of the dot. So as an in-house counsel, I have to look at all this and say, hey, we're launching a newbrand.com. Okay, Lori, attorney in-house, we want to launch new brand. What do you advise? Should we get the domain first or should we get the trademark first? And when we get the domain and when we get the trademark, how do we do defense? How many names should we carry? Uh, what's that going to cost? How many people are we going to need to make sure that we're watching the marks and watching the domains to make sure they're not abused? So there's a whole chain and cycle, and every corporation does something a little bit different. Some corporations, all of the domain acquisition is done through the technology department, you know, the information department, systems departments. Others, it's all done through the legal department. Others, it's all done through the marketing department. So every corporation has a different culture about who handles the acquisition. But when you're thinking about the name first, as Yongzhen mentioned, you want to make sure it's clear. So typically the lawyer would do what they call a clearance, and there's different kinds of clearance. We don't need to go into all the different levels of clearance, but clearance is done. And generally, I would call my outside counsel, Yongzhen, and say, Yongzhen, we want to register new brand. Do you see any problems? And it's up to Yongzhen to do that search, provide a report to me, and as the lawyer, I would analyze that report, and Yongzhen may say, this is not clear. If you use this, you probably will get sued. Or Yongzhen can say, well, I don't know. There's a lot of similar names out there. They're all coexisting. Maybe there's a place for you, but this could be a little risky, but maybe the risk isn't so high. Or maybe Yongzhen comes back and says, hey, this is really clear. This is new. This is creative. No problem, Lori. Go ahead. So that's what the clearance analysis is. Then in some companies, you would then try to get the domain name first and keep it a secret. Yongzhen mentioned that as well. I think Vivek too, that sometimes a new brand may create a company that holds the domains and holds certain assets because they're not ready to release the name publicly yet. They want to make sure that cyber squatters aren't jumping on the name. And in order to do that, some of this work needs to be done under a different name, a pseudonym. That's controversial. Some people believe there should be full transparency. Other people believe that there's no problem cloaking your identity for a while so that prices stay reasonable and that the odds of cyber squatting are lower. And I tend to be in the camp that believes it's better to have a pseudonym or an anonymous holding company that holds these assets until you're ready to release them to the public. But one of the things an attorney also thinks about is, you know, are there tax implications? So there's tax issues here. It's not just about getting a domain, not getting domain. It's about creating a company, potential revenue, potential expenditures, capitalization. And so it's not just a question of your IT department and legal and marketing. You also want to bring your tax people in terms of the assets. So there's a lot to think about on the inside of an acquisition. And cost is huge because I can tell you what the trends are in terms of corporate holdings of domain names. When I first started in practice, the idea was to defensively register whatever you could, wherever you could. And people were holding portfolios of 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000. There are some consumer products companies that own 100,000 domain names. And imagine paying the renewal fees and imagine keeping track of these names. You need a whole system around that. And with the new rounds, which added over 1,000 more domain names, it became literally impossible to do the kind of full-scale defensive registration that up until that point had been considered a best practice. It is no longer considered a best practice because companies simply can't afford it. So you really have to work very closely with experts to understand which extensions may have higher rates of squatting, which extensions are more valuable, which extensions are more widely available throughout the world, used throughout the world. So there's a lot of considerations in how to right size your domain portfolio. There's no one way. Every council has the responsibility to do their homework and decide what the best strategy is. And for some, it might be a dot brand. For some, hey, we can't afford any domains now. We're going to go to a social platform. That's my least, that to me is the least best advice. You want to at least have a dot something, a new brand dot something that you have your secure website on, and then work with the platforms and have everything feed into your secure website. And that's generally the best practice. Um, so the trends in usage, as described, are all over the map right now. As I said, some are using .brands, some use their own secure websites and don't worry that much about social media. Others, social media is an enormous part of their marketing plan. And not only do they worry about getting the .com, newbrand.com right away and parking it until they're going to use it, they want to make sure social media handles are available as well. So the social media example of a handle then also becomes an asset. So the asset is the domain names, and then the asset is a handle. But the problem with the handle is you don't own it. You don't even really have a license to it, or you have a license, but it's a light license. Platforms can decide for reasons under their own policies to withhold a handle or prevent handles from being registered. And most socially responsible platforms do have trademark policies that go into how they make these decisions. So the world is very broad in terms of rules, in terms of regulations, and in terms of figuring out how to do this country, by region, and by the globe. So it's a very complicated process, and it usually requires teams with many members of many different experiences. So right now, wherever the trends are falling, big portfolios, small portfolios, I would say there still is a trend to make sure you have at least one secure domain name where you have a secure website from which to run your business. Vivek, please feel free to add anything here.
Thank you, Laurie. Uh, some of you might know that recently OpenAI acquired chat.com, right? If you see, your first instinct as a brand owner or a company owner is always to register your brand name under a .com or a relevant TLD and use that for your business. But if you're a new business where your brand is not yet established, right, it does not matter whether you use your brand.com or a brand some TLD. What you want to do is tell your prospective customers very quickly what business you are in so that they can come over to your website and conduct business with you, right? So chat.com is a great example where they acquired this domain name because they wanted it short and not related to just GPT, right? So a lot of brands and businesses that we work with today, we educate them about, first of all, new TLDs. If you're in a coffee business, why not get a .coffee instead of a .com, right? But also, if you're in a business which is more generic and you have the ability to acquire a generic name, a dot with a .com or with a .in or a relevant TLD, you should definitely look at that because that will give your business a starting jump, which will be very beneficial in the long run. And then you have the time to establish your brand. For example, if I start a new business selling cycles and I call it vivekgoyal.com, nobody knows what I'm selling. But if I get bicycle.com, people don't care what my brand is till they use my product. And get acquainted with it and build trust in it, but they definitely know what I'm selling, and my uptake rate and my website visit will be much higher. So we are seeing some trend into that space where brands are becoming smart about what domain to use to get their businesses going.
Thank you so much. I think that's very helpful. Um, we do have a question. I am going to read it out loud. It's from James Galvin from Identity Digital. I will note that Identity Digital is a very large registry, and they manage some of the more well-known GTLDs that you might encounter in the marketplace. So his question to either one of you is about defensive registrations. Do either one of you have any experience with monitoring companies that will watch for related registrations that you should seek to recover rather than defensively registering? So basically, he's asking, do you use watch services? And if so, how do they work?
Yeah. Uh, Yongjin, if you're okay, may I go first?
Sure, of course. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. So monitoring is something that at L.R we do for a lot of big brands and businesses. So yes, like I said, there is a limit to how many brands, domains you can register as defensive purposes. You just cannot think of all the permutation combination that somebody might use to abuse your brand. It's just very impractical and infeasible. So we definitely monitor continuously new registrations of domain names across different TLDs, even CCTLDs, and we follow two process. One, our first aim is that if the domain name is actively being used with a website or sending out emails or in some other way, we try and take that down, but not necessarily acquire it. Because once you acquire a domain, it becomes a forever cost, right? In big businesses, it's easy to acquire a domain, but very, very, very difficult to get everybody aligned to let a domain go. Nobody wants to take the ownership. Yes, I will save the company $10 a year and take the responsibility that if somebody else acquires this domain in the future, it's my neck on the block. Nobody wants to do it. So the portfolio keeps inflating. So the best way is to first monitor, take down, and put a stance in this domain space to say our brand will not stand for domain abuse, right? With a continuous approach to monitoring and taking down and only acquiring very small part of it, which is either something that you missed in your initial assessment or which now you see as a usage going forward, you should not aim to acquire them, but take them down rapidly so that your brand stays clean and you are not burdened with an ever inflating portfolio.
Right. I'm going to interject just for a second here and say sometimes, though, people, and again, it depends what you can afford, will take the domain simply because if it gets taken down, if it gets taken down, eventually it could go back into the marketplace. I've seen that happen. And
Yeah.
if you don't want to go through the same process again, sometimes it's better to pay those annual fees as insurance policies. And that is how I explain it to my business clients, that if you decide to take something down and not acquire the name, not transfer the name, it could become back into the marketplace much sooner than you'd like. And then you're back at it. So where do you want the upfront $10 a year? Or the few $1,000s you're probably going to have to pay a lawyer to look at the facts, write a letter, negotiate some sort of agreement. So that is definitely a business decision in terms of whether you let it float or whether you take it back. Yes, Vivek.
Laurie, completely agree that it is a business decision for sure. I think it also depends on the kind of monitoring and brand protection service you employ. So, for example, in our case, we say take down and keep down. So, once a client tells us you take this down, we will ensure that if it comes back up again, we take it down ourselves without incurring extra cost to the client. In some cases, we have seen the clients have some policy, which we do not know, that they will not register domains which could possibly be have been used for phishing and not like registered domains which are abusive to themselves. I do not know the source of this policy, but it is some policy somewhere that floats to prevent registering for this domain. But I completely agree with you. Sometimes it's better to buy that domain than to wait for it to be abused again. Sometimes it's just we cannot buy more domains and have a renewal fee. But again, I agree. It's a business decision always.
Thank you, Vivek. And now I'm going to shift over to Yongzhen to talk about enforcement for the last few minutes, and we'll take the last 5 minutes for questions. So you have the next few minutes. And the two questions I have for you are, one, how do your clients identify, manage, and escalate domain enforcement issues in their companies and to you? And how do trends in global trademark laws affect your ability to enforce domain issues for your clients?
Thank you, Laurie. Actually, we're not talking about domain name enforcement. We are talking about at least two scenarios. The first scenario is that whether a domain name is facing cyber squatting. We would use some monitoring services and tools to identify such cyber squatting. And then when we found the squatting, sometimes we use CND letters and follow-up calls to see if there is room for negotiation or settlement. If impossible, then we either use the UDRP or Cynic to get the domain name back. For example, for .cn domains, we can file arbitration before CTAG and Hong Kong IAC. Or if for various reasons we do not use those alternative mechanisms, we can directly file a civil suit to realize the same purpose. And the second scenario is that a third party is using a domain name that infringes your other rights. So you want to get your rights enforced against this domain. And on this scenario, our enforcement normally is based on either a prior trademark or unfair competition or prior trade name or personal name, whatever, to try to enforce our other rights against the domain name. And as to the trend, I'd like to use the two simple cases to illustrate the importance of registering your domain name as soon as possible. So the priority date is the key. The first case was just concluded last December by China's Supreme Court. In 2017, the legal representative of a Hangzhou company, it registered a domain name datafocus.ai. And in 2019, the trademark Data Focus was filed by a different company on computing and website services. And the domain name owner tried very hard, but in vain, because they wanted to invalidate the trademark before trademark office, before the Beijing IP Court, before Beijing High Court, but he failed. However, the Supreme Court decided to retry the case and eventually supported the domain name's owner's claim to invalidate the Data Focus trademark. And the legal issue here, among others, include whether the prior domain name can be protected as a prior right or prior interest under trademark law. Because in past years, it was very hard because typical prior rights only consist of design patent, right of trade name, right of person name, copyright, etc., without specifically including domain name as a right or interest. However, in recent years, including this data focus ruling by the Supreme Court, more and more courts tend to protect domain name as a prior interest against a trademark squatter. So that's something we can consider. And the other case is the opposite one. One trademark owner, it's a very big Chinese tech giant, wanted to challenge a .cn domain name, but it failed because one of the reasons by the Hong Kong International Arbitration Center was that domain name, that .cn domain name, was registered before the tech company's trademark. So by using these two examples, I just want to emphasize that priority date, either it's the filing date of the trademark or the registration date of domain name, is vital. That's something we should consider move faster than any bad guys.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I also want to mention, besides the uniform dispute resolution process or court actions as described, you can always write a letter. If you can find out the name of who is you suspect of cyber squatting or suspect of infringement using a domain name, you can look at the website to find contact information. You can file requests for information using ICANN's registration data access system, RDRS. Again, you can look that up at ICANN.org. The RDRS is something that is undergoing, experimental work in terms of whether or not this is a system that will be sustainable for ICANN and for the community in terms of requesting names of who may own a domain name and getting access to that information. Access is a whole nother topic. I will say this, that global privacy laws, given their protections to individual data, have created some barriers to access to information that we did not previously have. And we are now working with ICANN and others around the globe to sort out how legitimate access seekers can get this information for enforcement purposes, for investigative purposes. Believe me, we are far from having the universal best answer, but we are working toward it. And I also want to mention, aside from the UDRP, there is something called Uniform Rapid Suspension, which is an even faster way of dispute resolution, where UDRP, the ultimate remedy is to transfer the domain. In a URS, the remedy is to suspend the domain, and it may in fact come back into the marketplace after a certain period of time, usually a number of years. The URS is faster. The URS costs about half of what the UDRP does in filing fees. However, because the remedy is temporary, some people don't choose the URS, or they'll use the URS to get the name down faster, and then they'll file a UDRP to get the name transferred permanently. That's a legitimate legal strategy that those who enforce use. We only have a couple. Vivek, if you don't mind, we only have about 2 more minutes. The time has flown. Does anybody have any other questions? Otherwise, I will let Vivek take the last word here. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anybody, Melody, do you see any hands? I don't see any hands. Then I'll go to Vivek. Vivek, you can close us out with your thought.
Thank you. Few thoughts on the enforcement. I am not a lawyer. I'll put that out there. I'm not a lawyer. My thinking is digital problems need digital solutions, right? So we do a lot of enforcement on behalf of brands. We do few thousand domain names, website shutdowns a month, right? What we have realized definitely helps, and this is something that we have been working actively in ICANN with Contracted Party House and have received quite a lot of support is, if you believe and if you have proof that the domain has been registered and is being used for phishing or malware or botnets or farming, you can reach out to the registrar and show them proof. And if they agree with your assessment, they will take down that domain. They will either suspend that domain or they might tell you we cannot take any action, but that is generally much faster if your aim is to provide relief to the brand and to your customers, more importantly, from being abused by that phishing page. So that is generally what has helped us out quite a lot. And like Laurie and Yingjin mentioned, going the legal route is a much more sure shot thing, but it takes longer and it costs more. In this case, this is a much faster action and provides immediate relief, giving you some breathing room to decide on a long-term action for this.
Thank
So
you,
just
Vivek.
that,
And
Laurie.
yeah, I appreciate that. We're at time, and I want to thank everybody. And I hope that this gives you some insight into how to plan to build a domain portfolio and how domains can certainly function as critical digital assets. If you have any further questions, you're welcome to contact us. Our emails are on the first slide. I believe the slides will be available. And we wish you a very happy domain conference. Sorry we can't be there in person, but we say thank you and wish you a very, very good afternoon. You may stop the recording.
Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Yongjin. And
Thank you, Laurie.
thank you,
Thank you,
everybody
Vivek.
who attended.